Ultimately, every role that I do is doomed. Or maybe there's one ultimate role that isn't, but that's always my mantra and my feeling with everything that I ever do. What am I talking about? Have a listen to this video and I'll explain. Please like and comment on the video below. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them in the future. So yeah, I use the word doomed in the broadest of senses here because I'm talking more about the scale of the opportunity rather than the opportunity itself. As long as exchanges and sports exist, I think there's a very rosy future because it doesn't matter how dominant you get in one sector. Complacency leads to arrogance and arrogance to failure. And therefore, I think the exchange concept in terms of trading is very sound. And I think if somebody abuses that or somebody doesn't progress it at fast enough space, then somebody will skip in and take over. I think once you've opened Pandora's box, there's no way you can close it again. Not going to happen. So I think that exchanges, and in fact, if you look at the whole peer-to-peer space, it's impossible to stop. It's just such a good solution. It's like the internet, that has transformed and changed so many things. We're not going to go back to using newspapers or watching 3 channels on TV. It's not going to happen. And like typewriters replacing the pen, we're not going to go backwards on that as well. So the exchange concept is safe. It's got nothing to do with why I'm going to be ruined longer term. Well, not ruined is the wrong word to use. So what's the word I'm looking for? Modified. My behavior is going to change because of the way the markets work, and necessarily success becomes self-limiting in any market. What am I talking about here? Well, when I first started, I set up with a bank of £1,000. And as I started dabbling around and messing around in the markets, I got to my first 100 quid reasonably safely. And of course, 100 quid on 1,000 is brilliant because, it's a 10% return on capital. That's much more than you could get in a bank account. Now, if you make £1,000 with £10,000, that's 10%. But if you make £1,000 using £100,000 of capital, then it's only 1%. So even at the appallingly bad interest rates that are available through banks, building society and savings institutions, you would still beat it by putting £100,000 in an account and not trading it on a market. So, necessarily you wouldn't do that, of course. You'd put £90,000 in the bank and building society and leave that £10,000 to trade with. But, one of the surprising things, and I've always said this to people, is that actually trading on sports is brilliant, especially for people with small amounts of money, because what you're focusing on is getting a trade through the market profitably and then repeating that process again and again and again. And there are tens of thousands of sports events that go on all year round. So of course you don't need to have a massive bank to be a successful sports trader. You just have a small amount of money and you keep reusing it as many times as you can in as many markets. And soon all of those little bits of money soon add up into much larger amounts. Now the problem that I've got is I've been going on for over a decade and a half. So the problem that I have is my bank has grown to a much, much larger amount. And the excess capital that I have, I just cannot put back into the market. If you look at the average UK horse race, it turns over about £500,000. And you're thinking, well, that's not a bad amount. Well, it's not too bad, but if you've got more than £500,000 in capital to use, you would be the entire market. So you can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. You have to scale your money down to a level at which it does make sense. But if you do that, then necessarily you're going to end up with excess capital. So what do you do with that? You invest it somewhere. And then, if that capital grows, then all of a sudden the return on capital that you're getting from the sports trading is smaller than the money you can get by investing it somewhere else. But it's a nice problem to have. I'm sure loads of people would love to have that problem. But ultimately, that's a major problem for me. I want to see the sports markets grow and grow and grow and grow. And the fact is, they haven't really exploded. They haven't gone to the levels at which I thought probably they would do in 10 years' time. And that's because most of the protagonists in the industry are chasing margin. And the issue with that is that they're not going for growth. And going for growth would allow all of us to benefit from ever increasing markets. But when you don't go for growth and you go for margin, you sacrifice growth. And therefore necessarily a lot of the larger players have banks that are just too big to put into the market, so they have to put it elsewhere, and that's distracting because you have to then start managing it and doing all those other things. So yeah, my reaction to having a fair amount of money to put through the market is that I don't actually use all of that money. I just move some of it away, and I just keep in my account what I need. And effectively what I'm doing is I'm just scaling back to the level at which the market will accept. Why am I doing that? Well, the interesting thing, I mean, it is self-limiting, because if you scale back, you can't earn as much on it as you could if you put more money through, but you can't put more money through for the following reason. When you scale back, you match the level of underlying liquidity in the market. So you put a trade in the market, you take a trade out. The problem that you have is not getting into the market generally, it's actually getting that position out. Because if you've got too much money in the market and you're desperate to close that position out, you have to start, you inevitably move the price. You can't avoid any other way. You put the money in the market, you wait for somebody to take it, and you think, it's not filling. So you think, well, I'll just take a tick lower. But of course, if you're doing 10, 20 times as much as the market can cope with, you will not be able to get out of your trade. So you can't do that. So my focus is actually not getting in, because I find that relatively easy, and everybody finds it easy. It's actually getting out is where the risk is. So the risk that you have within a trade is opening the trade and closing the trade, and the amount of time you spend doing that. The perfect trade would be where you can use a huge amount very quickly to get in and out, and it all happens in a split second. But of course, the market doesn't work like that. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't work like that. So you have to put a trade in the market. You have to ensure that you can get that trade out in a reasonable time period. And you have to use the easiest trick to getting out of a trade as quickly as possible is to not use too much money, is to use a reasonable amount, an amount that matches the underlying liquidity in the market. So from a core market perspective, that's why I want the liquidity in the market to grow and the turnover to grow, because that means I can use more money in the market. But in the absence of that, or if you look at the equity curve of a successful trader, it tends to outstrip the growth in the market. That leaves you with this horrible situation where you have more money than you can actually use sensibly in the market. It's not a horrible situation at all, actually, but it's a perplexing and difficult problem to deal with, because then you have to find a home for that. And there are many homes for that, but they all require management and time and effort. So that's why you tend to find, I can only put a lot of money through the big races. So my focus over time has gradually shifted. Doesn't mean that you should do as many as you possibly can, because when you're using small stakes, that's the best way to get to much bigger stakes. But necessarily, I'm limited by the size of events that I can do, because if I really want to go for it, it has to be on a much, much bigger race, and a televised football match, a big tennis, all of these things. I'm looking for the big opportunities, and I just can't participate in those smaller markets. So you'll probably find there's an opportunity in those smaller markets, because certain types of people aren't present. You don't have to go up against larger money, and a lot of people won't bother with them. So you'll probably find those markets slightly more favourable if you're using smaller stakes. But yeah, it's a nice problem to have, but that's ultimately the thing that's going to cause me a much longer term problem as well, is that for me, the return on capital that I can get is declining over time. And therefore I'm better off putting that money elsewhere to use somewhere else where it gets a higher return on investment. And, so where does that leave me? Well, I'm always thinking ahead, why not, get to 1 billion doing something at some point or whatever. There should be no limits to what you want to achieve, and you should at least give everything a try. So I'm constantly searching for interesting and new ways. And as anybody who deals with me will know, is I have fingers in many pies. I'm doing many things all the time. And my biggest problem is just trying to balance that all out with a normal life. But nonetheless, I'm forward thinking and progressive. And it doesn't mean that I'll stop, because I don't think that I ever will. Because when you look at the markets, they look to me like a fruit machine that constantly delivers winnings. I look at a market, I see an opportunity, and it feels foolish not to take it. And I enjoy it as well. That's the most important thing, is I enjoy pushing the boundaries and trying to understand the markets more and coming up with new theories and so on. And in fact, I've taken a lot of those things and put them back into financial markets. So things I've learned on Betfair, I've put into financials. So, I'm interested in continuing to push forward. And that fact aside, I have 3 children. So I'm pretty sure that they will pick up where I left off, and the money is more important to them than it is to me right now. So yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity in front of it. But I think that if you become successful on a decent scale, then it becomes self-limiting. But that's the same with everything. You know, if you opened a shop that was particularly popular, if you open 1,000 of them, your returns will diminish. That's just the way that life works. But ultimately, that's going to be the thing that limits my ability to trade the markets, is that I'll have to divide my time with all of the other projects that I do that probably have a higher return on investment. But the good news for you is that that high level of return on investment is applicable to anybody using smaller stakes. And in fact, it would be a great problem to have if you end up in the same situation as I. So why not go out there and pursue it?